Depending on where you're sitting right now, you're likely within, I don't know, 100 feet of a medical miracle.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
Right. Like it might be hanging on the wall at your local pharmacy or sitting in the nurse's office at your kid's school, or maybe it's even right there in your own household medicine cabinet.
Yeah, that's becoming super common.
Exactly. I'm talking about Narcan, which is the brand name for naloxone. And as of March 2023, you can just, walk into a store and buy it over the counter. It has essentially become as fundamental to modern emergency preparedness as well as a fire extinguisher.
Which is a great analogy because just like a fire extinguisher,
Right.
it's a tool you desperately hope you never actually have to pull off the wall.
Right, yeah.
But when crisis hits, I mean, having it readily available changes the entire trajectory of an emergency. It's life or death in a matter of minutes.
But, the whole headline of this nasal spray saves lives, it really barely scratches the surface of what is actually happening. So for this deep dive, our mission is to look under the hood of this chemical fire extinguisher.
Let's do it.
We've gathered pharmacology textbooks, historical accounts, clinical trial data, and policy papers,
No.
and we are going to explore the precise microscopic tug of war that is happening inside the human brain during an overdose.
It's wild when you actually visualize it.
It really is. We're going to look at the accidental chemical genius that made this biological reversal possible in the first place, and we'll unpack the really intense economic and policy debates surrounding these drugs today.
Because understanding the actual mechanics of these drugs, what pharmacologists call opioid antagonists,
Yeah.
it's just essential for anyone trying to navigate this landscape.
Right.
When you grasp the science, you can reason clearly about a public health crisis that, frankly, largely defines our era, separating the actual pharmacological facts from a lot of the political or cultural fiction that tends to surround them.
Absolutely. So to really understand why these little devices are sitting in medicine cabinets for you to use, we have to zoom way, way in. We're moving past the emergency room, past the patient, and into the brain, right down to the surface of our neurons.
Yep, the molecular level.
Right, because when we talk about an opioid overdose, we're dealing with a very specific piece of biological hardware called a mu-opioid receptor. There's also kappa and delta receptors, but mu is the big one here.
Right, the mu receptors. They basically act as these specialized communication hubs. They're scattered all throughout the brain and the body. But the ones we are most concerned with during an overdose are located in the brainstem.
Which is what controls our automatic breathing, right?
Exactly. You don't have to think to breathe because
Yeah.
your brainstem handles it.
Mhm.
But when a full agonist, and by that I mean a drug like morphine or heroin or fentanyl, when that binds to that mu receptor, it triggers this massive chemical cascade.
Okay.
That cascade produces the pain relief, the euphoria, the sedation, and critically, it tells the brainstem to slow down or even completely stop that drive to breathe.
Wow. Okay, so if we visualize these receptors as locks on a door, an agonist like fentanyl is the key.
I like that. Yeah, a key.
It fits perfectly into the lock, you turn it, the door opens, and all those biological effects, the pain relief, the suppression of the breathing reflex, they just come rushing through.
Which perfectly brings us to two really foundational concepts in pharmacology, which are affinity and efficacy.
Okay, lay those out for us.
So affinity is essentially a measure of how tightly a drug binds to a receptor. In your analogy, it answers the question, does the key fit the lock?
Right, does it slide in?
Exactly. And then efficacy is what the drug actually does once it's attached. Like, does the key turn the mechanism? So fentanyl, for instance, has high affinity. It fits the lock perfectly, and high efficacy, meaning it turns the lock wide open.
Okay, so if fentanyl is a key that fits and turns, my first thought is that an antagonist like naloxone must be, I don't know, a key that fits into the lock but then breaks off inside, jamming the whole thing up so nothing else can get in.
That's how a lot of people picture it. But it's actually a bit more elegant than that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it doesn't break. Think of an antagonist as a flawlessly, perfectly cut key that slides right into the lock seamlessly. So it has extremely high affinity.
Okay.
But because of its specific chemical shape, it absolutely refuses to turn. It has zero efficacy,
Oh, wow.
right?
Mhm.
It produces no downstream signaling, no euphoria, no pain relief. It just occupies the space.
And because it's just sitting there in the lock, the quote-unquote real keys, the actual opioid molecules, they're physically blocked from getting in and turning it.
Exactly.
But wait, an overdose means the real keys are already in the lock. If someone has stopped breathing because fentanyl is already bound to their receptors, naloxone must be doing more than just waiting around for an empty lock, right?
And it absolutely is. And this is a principle called competitive antagonism.
Competitive antagonism.
Right. It is not a passive blockade at all. It's an active microscopic eviction.
I love that phrase, microscopic eviction.
It's exactly what happens. If opioid molecules are already sitting on those receptors, shutting down a person's breathing, a strong enough antagonist will physically enter the system, bind to those receptors with a much higher affinity, and literally knock the opioids loose.
I just bumped them out.
We shoulder them right out of the way.
Yeah.
Whichever molecule is more abundant and binds more tightly basically wins the tug of war.
It's incredible to think about, like, one chemical physically shouldering another chemical out of the way in your brain.
It's a brawl.
Yeah, a molecular brawl. But knowing how the lock works in theory is one thing. Actually forging a key that fits but refuses to turn, I mean, that's a completely different challenge. And from our sources, the earliest attempts at creating this reversal agent in the 1940s were clinically disastrous.
Oh, they were a mess. Because the need for an antidote has been around for a long time. In the mid-20th century, doctors desperately needed a way to reverse respiratory depression, in surgical patients or overdose victims.
Yeah.
But the drugs they initially came up with, like one called naltrexone.
Naltrexone, yeah.
Right. They were what we call partial agonists.
Okay, so wait. If an agonist turns the key all the way and an antagonist doesn't turn it at all, I assume a partial agonist turns it halfway.
Exactly. It activates the receptor, but just weakly.
And that halfway turn was a bad thing.
That halfway turn was the whole problem. Naltrexone worked well enough to displace stronger opioids and restore breathing, sure. But because it still had some efficacy, it turned the key a little bit, it produced effects of its own.
Right.
And clinically, it was a nightmare for patients who were not already dependent on opioids.
Yeah, the descriptions of those side effects in the historical accounts are jarring. I mean, if they gave these 1940s antidotes to a non-dependent person, that halfway turn of the lock caused intense dysphoria, anxiety, and these severe hallucination-like reactions.
Yeah, terrible psychiatric side effects.
You're trying to save someone's life, and instead you're plunging them into a waking nightmare.
Exactly. So researchers quickly realized they desperately needed a pure antagonist, a molecule that blocked the receptor and did absolutely nothing else.
And the breakthrough for that pure antagonist came around in 1960. Enter two chemists, Jack Fishman and Moses J. Lewinstein.
The absolute pioneers here.
Right. They were working on this research effort, and their discovery is actually still taught today as a masterclass in structure-activity relationships in medicinal chemistry. But they didn't start from scratch, did they?
No, they didn't. They started with a drug called oxymorphone, which is a highly potent opioid painkiller.
So they started with a powerful agonist, a key that fits and turns completely.
Right. And here's the brilliant part. Every opioid molecule has a nitrogen atom embedded in its structure. And Fishman and Lewinstein discovered that the specific chemical group attached to that nitrogen atom basically dictates the entire identity of the drug.
The nitrogen atom is like the steering wheel.
Yes. It determines whether the molecule acts as a painkiller or a blocker.
So if the nitrogen atom is the pivot point, they must have swapped out whatever was attached to it to change the behavior of the key.
They made a single, incredibly precise edit. Just one. They removed a small N-methyl group from that nitrogen atom and replaced it with a slightly bulkier N-allyl group.
Just a slightly bulkier group.
That's it. And that one substitution flipped the entire molecule. The added bulk acted almost like a wedge on our microscopic key. It allowed the molecule to slide into the mu receptor perfectly. But that bulky allyl group physically prevented the molecule from turning and activating the receptor.
And naloxone was born.
Naloxone was born.
I really want to emphasize the scale of that for you listening right now. A single tiny chemical substituent swap, one edit, turned a powerful addictive painkiller into its exact functional opposite.
It's poetry, honestly.
And because it has absolutely no efficacy, it produces zero high, which naturally clears up a major misconception a lot of people have. I mean, some folks assume naloxone is an opioid that people can abuse.
Right, you hear that a lot.
But if it's mathematically impossible for the key to turn, it cannot be abused. It produces no euphoria whatsoever.
It has absolutely zero abuse potential. None. And by 1971, the FDA approved it, and it quickly became the gold standard for emergency rooms everywhere. When administered, naloxone just rushes into the brain, knocks the opioids off the brainstem receptors, and restores the drive to breathe, often within just 1 to 3 minutes.
It's a dramatic, immediate reversal. Like 1 minute someone is blue, the next they are breathing.
It's a 1 to 3 minute miracle.
But naloxone was a miracle of 1960s chemistry designed for a 1960s threat landscape, which was mostly heroin and prescription pills.
Right.
The introduction of synthetic opioids like fentanyl fundamentally altered the reality on the ground for first responders today. If naloxone is this perfect antagonist, why are we hearing so many stories of it failing in the field right now?
Well, the vulnerability isn't in naloxone's ability to block the receptor. The receptor mechanics are exactly the same. The vulnerability is in its biological half-life.
Okay, what does that mean?
Naloxone only lasts about 30 to 90 minutes in the body before it's broken down and eliminated.
Ah, and fentanyl is incredibly potent and can linger in the body's tissues for a much longer time.
Exactly.
So if naloxone wears off in 90 minutes, but the person still has a massive dose of fentanyl in their system, doesn't the remaining fentanyl just rush back in, reoccupy the receptors, and the overdose essentially just starts all over again?
That is exactly what happens. The old assumption that one dose is enough is completely dead.
Wow.
Because fentanyl is so potent, it's incredibly hard to displace in the first place, requiring more naloxone to even win that initial competitive tug of war.
Right.
And because its effects easily outlast naloxone's 90-minute window, harm reduction workers and paramedics frequently have to administer a second or even a third dose. And they have to monitor the patient really closely to ensure they don't just slip back into respiratory failure once the naloxone wears off.
Which brings up another really intense reality of the field. People often hear stories about someone receiving naloxone and instantly waking up in brutal, agonizing withdrawal.
Right, precipitated withdrawal.
Yeah, and there's this assumption that if a patient wakes up vomiting, shaking, and in immense pain, well, the drug must have had a toxic side effect or something went horribly wrong.
It's actually the exact opposite. If a dependent person experiences that severe precipitated withdrawal after receiving naloxone, it is clinical proof that the drug is working perfectly.
Working perfectly by making them miserable. To understand why that is so violent, think about leaning your entire body weight against a heavy door.
Okay.
You have to push constantly just to stay upright. If someone suddenly kicks that door wide open, you don't just stand up straight, right? You slam face first into the floor. A person dependent on opioids has a brain that is pushing back against constant, heavy opioid stimulation just to function normally.
That's a great way to picture it, because when naloxone rushes in, it acts instantly. I mean, in a matter of seconds, it violently displaces all the opioid molecules.
All of them at once.
Right. So the receptors go from fully activated to completely blocked. Yeah. The brain, which was bracing against the opioids, suddenly falls flat. That sudden, absolute absence of the drug that the body has adapted to, that is what causes severe, immediate withdrawal.
It's like pulling the rug out.
Yeah. It is meant to be uncomfortable because it means the blockade is absolute and the respiratory depression has been completely halted. You are breathing again.
But because naloxone is so short-acting, it's strictly an acute emergency fire extinguisher. It does not treat the underlying addiction.
Not at all.
Scientists realized pretty quickly that if you're dealing with a chronic condition like opioid use disorder, you also need a long-term smoke detector system, essentially, something that provides a durable shield.
Right. And that search led chemists right back to the nitrogen atom in 1965, just a few years after naloxone was discovered. They used the exact same structural logic to create naloxone's cousin compound, naltrexone.
Naltrexone. Okay, so they went back to the drawing board, and instead of swapping in an ally group, they swapped in a cyclopropylmethyl group alongside adding a saturated ring to the molecule.
Right.
Now, that sounds like deep organic chemistry jargon, but what did that specific edit actually achieve biologically? Like, what's the difference?
It dramatically extended the molecule's life in the body. While naloxone is broken down and eliminated in about 90 minutes, naltrexone resists breaking down.
Okay.
In pill form, it blocks the opioid receptors for roughly 24 hours. And eventually they developed an extended-release injectable version called Vivitrol that slowly releases the drug, blocking the receptors for an entire month.
A whole month. And, because their names are so similar, people constantly confuse naloxone and naltrexone, assuming they're just the same drug.
Oh, all the time. But they serve entirely different purposes.
Right. Naloxone is the fast-acting emergency antidote to keep you breathing right now. Naltrexone is a maintenance medication. If someone takes naltrexone daily or gets the monthly Vivitrol shot and then tries to use an opioid, they feel absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all. The receptor is physically blocked. The reward pathway is entirely shut down.
And the clinical potential of that month-long blockade led to a massive clinical trial published in The Lancet in 2018, known as the XBOT trial.
Yeah, the XBOT trial. It was funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse.
Right. And researchers wanted to compare this extended-release naltrexone against buprenorphine to see which was more effective at preventing relapse. Now, buprenorphine is a partial agonist, right? Like those 1940s drugs, it turns the key just halfway.
Exactly. It activates the receptor just enough to stop cravings and withdrawal, but generally not enough to create a strong high.
Okay, so the researchers were comparing a partial activator against a total blocker. From a purely logical standpoint, if naltrexone completely blocks the high, why wouldn't every doctor just prescribe the total blocker instead of buprenorphine, which still, tickles the receptor?
Well, the XBOT trial revealed the massive practical catch with naltrexone.
The catch.
Because it is such a powerful antagonist, a patient must be fully detoxed from all opioids before they can take their first dose.
Because if you give them naltrexone while they still have opioids in their system...
You trigger that severe precipitated withdrawal we just discussed.
Oh, man.
But instead of it lasting for 90 minutes, like with naloxone, the naltrexone locks onto the receptors for days or even weeks.
Wow.
The patient would be plunged into an agonizing withdrawal that they cannot easily reverse.
That is a terrifying prospect for someone seeking treatment. To safely start naltrexone, our sources note a patient has to endure roughly 7 to 10 completely opioid-free days to ensure their system is entirely clear. Asking someone in the grips of a severe opioid use disorder to white-knuckle through a week of withdrawal is, well, it's an incredibly tall order.
And that is exactly what the trial data showed.
Mm-hmm.
The researchers found that once a patient successfully navigated that detox window and actually started the naltrexone, it worked just as well as buprenorphine for preventing relapse.
Okay.
But getting them through that initial 7 to 10 day hurdle was incredibly difficult. Many patients dropped out of the trial before they even got to take their first dose of naltrexone.
It's a stark reminder that a perfect chemical mechanism on paper must still survive the messy, grueling reality of human biology.
It's tough.
And, the translation of a drug from the laboratory to the real world is rarely smooth in other ways, too. Because as these molecules move from clinical settings into the hands of the public, they collided with economics, human behavior, and public policy in ways that sparked fierce controversies.
Oh, yeah. The real world gets complicated fast.
Because a drug is only useful if the people who need it can actually afford it, which brings us to a massive collision between public health and pharmaceutical capitalism.
The pricing of these life-saving drugs has been a major point of contention. In 2016, a pharmaceutical company called Kaleo found itself at the center of a national scandal regarding their naloxone autoinjector, which was called Evzio.
Right. Now, naloxone, as we established, was invented in the 1960s. The chemical itself costs pennies to manufacture.
Practically nothing.
Traditionally, it was drawn up from a vial with a syringe by trained medical professionals. But as the opioid crisis expanded, there was a desperate need to put naloxone into the hands of everyday people, parents, teachers, bystanders.
Right, people without medical training.
Exactly. So Kaleo recognized this and created Evzio, which was an auto-injector that actually talked the user through the injection step by step, making it totally foolproof for someone panicking during an overdose.
It was an excellent delivery system for a layperson. I mean, truly innovative. But the controversy erupted over the cost. Kaleo hyped the price of this device to roughly $4,000 for a 2-pack.
$4,000?
Yeah. They took a drug that was practically free to produce and priced it at a massive premium, just as public health officials were desperately trying to saturate communities with it.
It's wild. It triggered a U.S. Senate investigation and drew major comparisons to the EpiPen pricing scandal. It really highlighted how the transition of a drug from a clinical setting to a consumer-friendly device can be exploited, which severely hinders harm reduction efforts.
Absolutely.
But the debates around naloxone are not just about corporate pricing. They also extend into deeply contested theories about human behavior.
And this is where we have to look at the broader public health strategy. In 2018, 2 economists, Jennifer Doligak and Anita Mukherjee, published a working paper that proposed applying a concept known as moral hazard to the widespread distribution of naloxone.
Moral hazard, which is a standard economic principle, right?
Yeah.
It occurs when someone increases their exposure to risk because they feel protected from the consequences.
Right.
A classic neutral example is anti-lock brakes or seatbelts. If a driver feels safer, they might subconsciously drive a little faster. So Doliak and Mukherjee theorized that widespread legal access to naloxone might reduce the perceived danger of an opioid overdose.
Right. Their economic argument suggested that by lowering the risk of death, broad naloxone access might inadvertently encourage an increase in risky opioid use,
Wow.
and potentially offsetting some of the life-saving benefits by simply increasing the total number of overdoses in certain regions.
Now, obviously, we are just presenting the arguments from the source text here, but when we examine the public health response to this economic theory, the pushback was swift and severe.
Oh, it's intense.
The harm reduction consensus, which has been building since groups like the Chicago Recovery Alliance pioneered community naloxone distribution way back in the 1990s, they argue that this is a fundamental misreading of addiction.
Totally different viewpoints.
Harm reduction researchers emphasize that putting naloxone directly into the hands of drug users, families, and bystanders simply saves lives without generating any credible evidence of increasing overall drug use.
Public health experts argue that, simply put, you cannot recover if you are dead.
Right.
The primary goal must be preserving life. While the Doliak and Mukherjee conclusion faced intense methodological criticism from the medical community, it hasn't really been widely replicated in public health literature. It remains a major touchstone in policy debates.
It perfectly illustrates how a tool as clearly beneficial as an overdose antidote can become this huge battleground for contested interpretation once it is introduced into complex human societies.
Science doesn't exist in a vacuum, that's for sure.
It really doesn't. And just to clear up some final misconceptions we see out there, I'll fire them off. First, no, naloxone does not treat addiction. It just keeps you alive.
Exactly.
And no, it is not an opioid you can abuse to get high. It has zero abuse potential. And finally, no, naloxone and naltrexone are not the same drug, despite the confusingly similar names.
Right. Short-acting fire extinguisher versus long-acting smoke detector.
Exactly. So, when we step back and look at the whole picture, the journey of opioid antagonists is remarkable. I mean, we started macroscopic, looking at a simple nasal spray in a medicine cabinet. We zoomed all the way down into the brainstem to watch a literal microscopic eviction affinity without efficacy.
The molecular brawl.
Right. We saw how Jack Fishman's brilliant single-atom chemical swap in the 60s turned a painkiller into a pure blocker. We confronted the terrifying reality of fentanyl outpacing naloxone in the field, and we explored the grueling 10-day detox hurdle of treating addiction with naltrexone.
And knowing this underlying science is just deeply empowering for everyone listening. Knowing the difference between an agonist, a partial agonist, and an antagonist, it is not just trivia for a pharmacology exam.
No, not at all.
Yeah. These microscopic mechanics dictate state laws, they define emergency medical protocols, and they determine how society funds and supports people trying to rebuild their lives in recovery.
Which leaves me with one final thought for you. While looking into the molecular structure of these drugs for this deep dive, there is a subtle detail in our sources that really sticks out.
Oh yeah, what's that?
We like to think of pharmacology in clean binary terms. You know, this drug is an activator, that drug is a blocker.
Sure.
But the boundary between those two states is actually a messy overlapping spectrum. We saw that buprenorphine sits right in the gray zone. And even naloxone, the ultimate pure blocker, apparently shows very minor, clinically insignificant agonist-like activity in certain extreme laboratory experiments.
It does, yeah. The lines are not always as sharp as we want them to be.
But it really makes you wonder, if the line between a deadly respiratory poison and a miraculous life-saving cure comes down to a single microscopic molecular edit on a nitrogen atom, and if the boundary between activating a biological system and shutting it down is just a messy spectrum, how many other quote-unquote incurable conditions are we currently looking at the wrong way? How many other medical crises are just sitting there waiting for a chemist to recognize the pattern and make one tiny molecular swap?
It's a profound thought.
It is. It's definitely something to think about the next time you see that little nasal spray sitting next to the Band-Aids in your local pharmacy.